Welcome to another big report here for a Saturday, and it's Breakfast Extra. As Ondo State prepares for its gubernatorial elections, attention is turning to a critical issue that has long affected Nigeria's democratic process: the safety of journalists covering elections. Now, media professionals have frequently faced physical confrontations, harassments, and other threats while reporting, highlighting the pressing need for protection that allows journalists to carry out their work without fear. Ensuring journalists' safety isn't just about protecting individual journalists, but it's about safeguarding credible and transparent elections.
And so we turn our attention to our correspondent, Igbalaniyi Omoniyi, and it brings us more on this topic with his report. Take a look. We will try to bring you that report and as we continue with the conversation. But first, to discuss the challenges and the steps media professionals are advocating for, news centrist Igbalaniyi Omoniyi joins us now to have this discussion. Many thanks to you, Igbalaniyi, for joining us. We appreciate you for coming on and just having this conversation with us. Also joining us is Ayodeji Ologun. He's a media entrepreneur and general manager, Melody FM. Ayodeji, thank you so much for joining us as well. Gentlemen, we appreciate you for coming on. Neil, let me start with you, right? As we approach the Ondo State election, which is pretty much about a week from today, can you give us an overview of the main threats that journalists face in Nigeria, particularly during election coverage?
Thank you, Judith. I'd like to start with statistics. The National Press Center for 2019 election recorded over 250 journalists harassed, intimidated, and tortured at some point. And for the last election, which was 2023, there were about, I think, 39 journalists that were intimidated, harassed, and also tortured at some points. Now, noting those statistics, we can even see from various local government elections that have happened afterwards how some journalists have been attacked, even aside even the election now. Just the fact that journalists are there seems to be a threat to not just stakeholders involved, not just the political parties involved, but also security officers involved. And this has been a major concern: safety of journalists, press freedom. And even if people look at the ranking of Nigeria currently in press freedom, it's quite far from where it's supposed to be. And this has raised concerns for journalists across various strata. They are calling for the safety, and proper. These laws are there to protect journalists, and that's the truth. But we see day in, day out across various elections that journalists still become targets of political parties, depending on whatever, not just political parties, depending on whatever it is they are doing. I remember for once, one of the deadliest elections I covered was the one in Ondo State, and I think I spoke to one of the who also went to Kano State. That was one of the deadliest he covered. In fact, we could have lost our lives that day. Why? Because we were there to cover what they don't want us to cover. And that is an issue. But the most painful part of it is when you see security operatives in these locations who are meant to be the mediator, or who are meant to support, who are meant to make sure that there's peace and order, but they are acting idle. They are not taking sides. They are not trying to protect and create peace. But they're just there keeping calm, letting the political thugs or whoever it is that wants to disrupt the process. I was listening recently to the first PRO, Muiwa Adejobi, and he was mentioning that one of the reasons why journalists might be talking about the safety of journalists and all during these elections is most of them are not properly identified. That is, they are not maybe wearing their identity in terms of their ID cards or the way they dress. They don't dress like a journalist. And I'm like, is there a dress code for journalists? Yes, there's the moderates. How would I put it now? There's the modesty in terms of dressing, on how you need to dress. And because we move around a lot, we can't be coming in our danshiki to the field, certainly. But at least we'll be in the proper jean and something comfortable that you can move around with. And you put on your ID card as it's supposed to be for every journalist for proper identification. And noting that during this election periods, we usually have accredited tags that each journalist puts on. I do believe that every journalist knows that is a rule that they are supposed to obey, and they put this on. Yet they still remain intact and they still remain intimidated. And I think now is the time that something needs to be done. Attack on the safety and press freedom is an attack on the democracy itself, is an attack on the election itself, because once the people cannot report, once journalists cannot report what exactly they see, and you're trying to interfere with what I used to say to journalists, my job is not to say the truth, my job is to say the fact, because truth is subjective. Your truth might be different from another person's truth, but of course I'm there to give the facts, and once you distort that fact, then you've distorted the process, which in turn distorts the democratic process altogether. So I feel it's high time we start looking into these issues and understanding, letting all stakeholders understand that from the electoral umpire, which is INEC, to the police, to security operatives, to the political parties themselves. I see them sign a peace deal, peace treaty, or whatever it is you want to call it. But most times those things do not translate to the field where you find in action on the field. They do not want to know it, especially if you're not part of what they call maybe the big four or the big three or the big five or the big seven. That is the known media houses across board, even across Nigeria.
This is where me and you fight. I don't know what you're talking about. There's only a big one, and that's News Central. I don't know what you're talking about. But away from let me bring Ayodeji into this conversation and talk to you as well, Ayodeji. I took something away from Niyi's report, Niyi's submission there, when he was talking about him having to do his job as a journalist and having to pick within his security, knowing that he's always a threat. And so let me come to you and ask you as well. You are a media entrepreneur, and that means you also are outside getting stories and getting just reporting on the news. How do you balance the need for hard-hitting, impactful journalism, but also your safety concerns in your mind?
Well, as journalists, is one thing that the electoral process has not taken cognizance of. And in most cases, it has eroded the fairness and the justness of the electoral process, whereby journalists have been under unnecessary and avoidable threats. And when I say unnecessary and avoidable threats, it's not only physical, it's sometimes psychological, it's sometimes digital. If you recall, I've had experience of reporting in my reportorial days as a reporter for one of the stations I worked with there. And while going live, on set reporting situation, crisis broke out on the back, and the fourth target was myself and the cameraman, because they felt whatever happened in that polling booth will make it to the media. So this is one of the threats that journalists go through. It's unsafe, psychologically and physically, when you are on duty, and then the next thing on your mind is the possibility of being hit from the back or being attacked. This impairs on the psychological well-being of reporters. It's also in part on the deliverables, that is the quality of reports that they present. When you're talking about threats that come to journalists, let me quickly break it down into three. For me, there's this physical aspect of it. One of it is the experience I've just shared with you. While journalists have to work in hostile communities, there are naturally hostile communities to the media. People will just feel that nothing they do should make it to the media. They don't see whatever they do as being good enough or necessary for reporting. There are some journalists that have to work in crime-dominated areas, where naturally in an election in the state or the local government, you know that these are volatile areas. Naturally, they are the rate of crime in such places are high. So when you have journalists reporting or performing their duties in places like this without necessary police coverage, or they are not immune to attacks from people who have things to hide, it becomes worse. Another thing that happens to journalists, which many people don't actually take care of, journalists many times don't even care about, is the digital safety. Most of the time, you need safety, digital-wise, to transmit your reports and stuff like that. So what happens when you are reporting from places where there are no so-called data network, there are no provisions for such, either from media house owners themselves or even those that should be of help in ensuring that data can be transmitted from one point to the other, maybe from the point of reportage to the radio station, the TV stations, or the print, as the case may be. So these are things that need to be taken care of, so that we just like the other guy said, sometimes what politicians see or what they want you to see is what they with their own truth. And in most cases, their truth is from the reality or the truth of another person. So they want to streamline the mindset of journalists, especially the so-called unconventional or as I might call it, who see election also as a period of catching out. A lot of journalists do that. They abandon the real places where reports should come from, and you see them running after politicians for interviews and what have you. These are very key issues that we need to take care of as journalists and ensure that while journalists are going about their rights, they are going about their duties, their protection is factored into the protection of voters, if not much more, because whatever is done needs to get it, it needs to be gotten out to the wider audience, which sometimes cuts across the world.
All right then. Mr. Igbalaniyi, our very own, please, let's come back to you. Last month we saw an election where authorities, security authorities were actually withheld or withdrawn from an election. I'm wondering what concerns this raised for you when you heard about this proposition by the security authorities.
Yeah, the funny thing, that was Rivers State you mentioned. When we landed Rivers State and we saw some observers were already even jetting out of the states out of fear and saying, oh, if the security operatives have been withdrawn from an election, as it were, local government election, then what would happen? It means everywhere will be in chaos. And knowing how tense the political atmosphere was at the time, or still is in Rivers State, and the fear was quite much. But guess what? On election day, there were very, very few pockets of violence. I mean, during the process, during the electoral process, the people themselves were the one protecting the polling units. They were standing right there. There were no police around. There were no security operatives. Yes, there were issues about moving of electoral material by an individual, as it's supposed to be the VCEC officer in that case. But there were no tensions. There were no attacks on journalists. In fact, they were protecting us. In fact, they brought us in. They were the one taking us around. Okay, this is one polling unit here. This is another polling unit here. This is one polling unit here. You can see what's happening here. But the challenge with that is, since they are the one taking us around and we are at their mercy, when we notice some things and you're about to go live and make some comments, and you know that this community is dominated by this particular set of people, you have to watch what you say. And for example, across some polling units in Rivers State where we saw, I can't even tell if any election took place in that polling unit. But when I had to go live and I was seeing those men, the macho men behind me, all I could talk about was talking about all the polling units we had been before we got here.
Now, Nee, that's a very interesting. Nee, that's a very interesting bit you just added there. Now, what are the implications to the arguments that these authority agencies sometimes are actually used as apparatus for the different parties during these elections? If you noted that it was rather peaceful as against other elections where we've had heavy presence of security, what are the implications here for the security forces?
Yeah, in fact, the funny thing, the people there were laying allegations saying that the security operatives themselves are the one who try to thwart peace, who try to cause instability during the electoral process, because the Rivers State election was particularly a local government election, was particularly peaceful. The implication here is that the trust gap between the people and the security operatives keeps getting deeper, and people do not trust them. People do not believe in them. They don't believe in them to create that balance, to give them protection when they need it. Because over time, even across various elections, you will see security operatives at a particular unit, and things are happening there, and they're not saying anything. In fact, I can't remember which of the state elections we were at. We recorded something happening, vote buying on our camera at the time, and the political talks were trying to attack us. And we're telling the police officers that, can't you see what's going on here? And it just came to meet us and said, oh, okay, the best will be transparent. And he monitored it, that we delete the visuals from our camera. Then he tried to calm down the political talks that, oh, don't worry, he said it's in this that compromise. And further makes people understand that if you see military officers across various polling units, I can tell you for a fact that people respect them more than the Nigerian police. And that is a big concern because the Nigerian police is supposed to be in charge of internal security. They are the one who's supposed to create the balance, create the peace. And if they are if they're there, it's not effective, or we're not seeing their impact. If they are not there, we really can't tell. Then why exactly do you have them across various polling units? Yes, we can argue that the River State local government elections was quite small. We're just talking about a handful of people, but we're not talking about the state election. We're talking about national election as it were, presidential election, which caters to the voting of over 200 million people. And that is quite huge, which means other sister agencies will need to join in. So there's so many angles to this.
Right. I mean, you're talking about fear. Do you lock people up in prison or carry guns? Come on now. Well, let me bring Ayodeji to this. Ayodeji, we're pressed for time. We have about a minute. And I would just like for you to give your closing remarks on this topic. What would be your call to action? You are a general manager of a radio station. You also are a media entrepreneur. You've got years of experience when it comes to a career, invested in journalism. Your call to action.
I think it is important to call on the people, particularly because we dwell too much on security operatives. In most cases, they are complicit in what even happened to journalists. So I think it's important that we call on the people themselves to see journalists as people that are helping society, people that are helping to protect what exactly will make society better. I mean, in such cases, when you see a journalist coming to your opponent, irrespective of your political leanings, you should realize and you should know that these are people that should be insulated from whatever attack you might choose to carry out for political reasons. It is important that we protect the integrity and the welfare of journalists so that they will do the best that they can for society that we all can be proud of. And let me quickly say this to journalists. As much as we have laws that protect us on the pages of the book, most of the time we are victims of actions and inactions of the political class. And as such, we must ensure that professionalism is upheld. The issue that has to do with limits should be taken away from her professional delivery in such a way that whatever we do, we will not become such targets of a group of people or a political party that believes that we're either working for one against the other.
Well, I want to say thank you very much to both of you, gentlemen. Mr. Ayodeji Ologun, GM, Melody FM, and of course our very own Igbalaniyi, Omoniyi, News Central correspondent. Thank you very much for being on this discussion with us.